He had it all: a luxury car, a mansion in a gated community, and a monthly income of $10,000. He was admired, respected, untouchable. But within months, everything crumbled. This is the true story of a man who fell from the top to financial ruin without even noticing. And without realizing it, you might be on the same path. Mark Adams was the kind of man people envied. At 38, he was living the American dream. A high-end marketing consultant in Austin, Texas, he billed over $120,000 a year. His wife, Jennifer, ran a successful online store, and their combined income placed them in the top 10% of earners in the country. But behind their polished social media posts and frequent weekend getaways, the reality was darker. Mark was living paycheck to paycheck, and didn't even know it. It started small. A new Tesla, financed in 72 monthly installments. A private school for the kids. An upgraded kitchen with imported marble countertops. Everything was justified. "We work hard, we deserve it," he'd say. The income was steady, and the future looked bright. But month after month, their lifestyle inflated faster than their earnings. By the time Mark realized he had no emergency fund, no investments, and a credit card bill that kept rolling over, it was already too late. The turning point came when Jennifer's store was hit hard by changes in online platform algorithms. Her revenue dropped 60% in 3 months. At the same time, one of Mark's biggest clients downsized and canceled their contract without warning. Suddenly, their $10,000 monthly cash flow dropped to just over $3,500. But the expenses, $9,800 monthly, didn't shrink as fast. The mortgage, car payments, tuition, and subscriptions kept draining their accounts. Mark tried to hold on. He used credit cards, took out a personal loan, and even considered borrowing from friends. But the debt grew faster than he could manage. Within 6 months, their credit score plummeted, the bank began foreclosure proceedings, and the Tesla was repossessed. Mark, who once gave talks on financial freedom at networking events, now avoided phone calls and emails. Shame wrapped around him like a noose. What happened to Mark isn't rare. According to the Federal Reserve, over 32% of high-income earners in the U.S. live paycheck to paycheck, especially those earning between $100K, $150K annually. A study by Lending Club found that nearly 60% of Americans making 6 figures say they struggle to meet monthly obligations. The trap isn't in low earnings, it's in high spending and financial blindness. Mark didn't fail because he was reckless. He failed because he lacked a structure. Like many, he never built a budget that included fixed limits. He never separated business from personal finances, and he relied entirely on income, not cash reserves, to absorb life's unexpected punches. When the fall finally came, Mark and Jennifer were forced to move into a small rental on the outskirts of town. But it was in that moment of loss that Mark found clarity. A mentor, a retired accountant, introduced him to the zero-based budgeting method. Every dollar now had a job. They cut unnecessary expenses, sold luxury items, and began rebuilding, cent by cent. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Within a year, they paid off $27,000 in debt and saved their first $10,000 emergency fund. Mark now shares his story publicly. He speaks at community centers, warning others that high income doesn't equal financial security. His message is simple: it's not about what you make. It's what you keep, and how prepared you are for when the music stops. His story isn't just a fall from grace, it's a blueprint for how anyone, regardless of income level, can collapse if they ignore the basics. And how recovery is always possible when ego gives way to education. Mark's journey wasn't a straight climb after rock bottom. Recovery, he learned, is rarely linear. The debts didn't disappear in a single month, and the emotional weight of failure still clung to him like humidity on a Texas summer night. But step by step, he began to rebuild, and the first major breakthrough came not from money, but from awareness. One afternoon, while attending a local financial literacy workshop recommended by his mentor, Mark sat through a lecture titled "The Silent Signs of Impending Bankruptcy." The speaker, a former bankruptcy attorney turned educator, opened with a sentence that hit like a punch to the chest: most bankruptcies don't start with a big loss, they start with small, invisible leaks. Mark's mind instantly flashed back to the dozens of subscription services he never used, the luxury gym membership they hadn't visited in months, the spontaneous online shopping orders that added up quietly in the background. He had always seen his income as a shield, until he realized it had only made his financial carelessness more dangerous. The workshop introduced him to the concept of financial red flags, subtle patterns that, if ignored, almost always lead to collapse. Among them were, carrying a balance on credit cards for more than 2 months, dipping into savings to pay for recurring bills, not knowing the exact amount of monthly expenses, and emotional spending triggered by stress. Later that night, Mark created what he called his financial danger map. On one side, he listed all the red flags he had ignored in the past. On the other, he began listing the new habits he needed to adopt to counter each of them. It wasn't just an exercise, it was a reckoning. One glaring realization stood out: Mark had never tracked his net worth. For someone who made 6 figures, he should have had assets growing. Instead, his liabilities were swallowing him whole. With guidance, he began calculating everything: debts, assets, cash flow, even the depreciation of his car. The result was sobering: his net worth was negative $38,000. But awareness is the seed of transformation. From that day on, Mark implemented what financial experts call the 5 core metrics: net worth, to track growth over time; monthly cash flow, income versus expenses; debt-to-income ratio, to measure debt load; emergency fund ratio, savings versus essential monthly expenses; savings rate, how much of his income he kept. Every Sunday became financial check-in day. He and Jennifer would sit at the kitchen table, review their budget, check their bank accounts, and adjust spending for the week ahead. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't exciting. But it worked. In parallel, Mark began to understand why he had failed, not just how. He started reading studies on financial psychology and was stunned to find that a high percentage of bankruptcies are filed by people who never believed it could happen to them. A report from the American Journal of Public Health revealed that 66.5% of bankruptcies in the U.S. are tied to medical issues, many of which hit those with decent incomes but no financial buffer. But what struck him most was a psychological study showing that people who view money as a source of identity, rather than a tool, are far more likely to make reckless financial decisions. That had been Mark. Every dinner he hosted, every designer shirt, every social media photo had been curated not for joy, but for validation. As he tore down those illusions, something powerful began to emerge. Mark no longer feared bankruptcy, he respected it. He saw it not as an event, but as a process of erosion. And with that respect came discipline. Jennifer, inspired by the change, took a bookkeeping course and began offering freelance services to local entrepreneurs. They used the income not for lifestyle inflation, but to pay off remaining credit card debt. Mark sold his expensive watch collection, once a symbol of success, now a reminder of misplaced priorities, and used the money to finish paying off the car loan. By the end of year 2, their net worth had finally turned positive. It was modest, just over $8,000. But it was theirs. Untouched by lenders, unthreatened by sudden expenses. For the first time, Mark felt financially clean. And in that quiet, steady climb, he learned a truth that changed everything: bankruptcy doesn't just destroy finances, it destroys illusions. And that can be the best thing that ever happens to someone willing to rebuild with eyes open. By the 3rd year, Mark wasn't just surviving, he was evolving. Financial recovery had taught him the importance of structure, but now he was learning something deeper: true financial stability doesn't come from income or budgeting alone. It comes from education. And that realization arrived in the most unlikely way, through his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. One afternoon, Lily came home from school confused. "Dad, why don't we go on vacation like we used to? Did something bad happen?" The question cut through him. Not because she was asking for things, but because she noticed the absence of excess. For the first time, Mark found himself trying to explain the concept of debt to a child. And he failed. That night, Mark sat down and Googled, how to teach financial literacy to kids. The rabbit hole that followed changed his life. He discovered a harsh truth: financial education is nearly non-existent in American schools. According to the Council for Economic Education, only 25 U.S. states require a personal finance course for high school graduation. Millions of Americans are released into adult life without ever learning how credit works, what interest rates mean, or how to build wealth. Mark realized that he hadn't failed because he was irresponsible, he had failed because no one had taught him how not to. Fueled by that anger and a renewed sense of purpose, Mark began studying. He devoured books like The Millionaire Next Door, Your Money or Your Life, and The Psychology of Money. He followed personal finance experts, took online courses in behavioral economics, and even audited community college classes on financial planning. He wasn't looking to become a guru, he was trying to reclaim the decades he had spent financially blind. As his knowledge grew, so did his confidence. He implemented key principles that most self-made financially stable people follow, starting with the 50/30/20 rule: 50% of income to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings or debt repayment. For the first time, Mark and Jennifer had a system that respected their limits and empowered their choices. One of the most powerful shifts came when they embraced value-based spending. Instead of cutting expenses blindly, they began ranking what truly mattered to them. Travel and family time ranked high. Branded clothes and impulse electronics? Not so much. They stopped trying to match the lifestyle of others and started aligning spending with their values. As a result, their satisfaction increased while expenses decreased, a win-win most people never think is possible. Mark also learned how to properly use credit, not as a crutch, but as a tool. He opened a secured card to rebuild his score, always keeping the utilization below 10% and paying in full each month. Within 18 months, his credit score went from the low 500s to 730. It wasn't magic. It was knowledge applied consistently. Education gave him the weapon he had been missing: control. He now understood compound interest, how it can either crush you or build you, depending on which side you stand. He learned the real difference between assets and liabilities, a distinction that had once seemed abstract. He realized that retirement isn't an age, it's a number. And for the first time in years, he was working toward that number. But the most radical change was emotional. Financial education gave Mark and Jennifer the language to talk about money without guilt, blame, or anxiety. Their financial meetings became something they looked forward to. Their relationship deepened, not because they had more money, but because they had more clarity. Mark began volunteering at local community centers, sharing his story and the simple lessons he had learned. One night, after a talk, a man approached him and said, "I make $150,000 a year and I'm drowning. You just explained my life." That moment stayed with Mark. He realized that people don't need inspiration, they need information. He wasn't a financial advisor. He was living proof of what's possible when you stop pretending and start learning. His home may have been smaller, but his life had grown beyond anything money alone could buy. In a country where 78% of workers live paycheck to paycheck, according to a report by CareerBuilder, Mark's story is far from unique. But what makes it powerful is that he escaped the cycle, not by earning more, but by understanding more. And now, his mission was clear. Help others unlearn the myths, face the numbers, and finally, take control. Mark's recovery had been steady, but not spectacular. Budgeting, cutting expenses, learning, all had helped him stop the bleeding. But now, standing in the quiet of his small home office, he faced a new question: was surviving enough? What about growth, freedom, future? The turning point came in the form of a dentist appointment. Lily needed braces, a $4,200 expense, only partially covered by insurance. Mark had $800 saved for emergencies. It wasn't enough. That familiar cold dread returned, the kind that used to live in his bones. Only this time, he didn't panic. He opened a notebook, scribbled a title across the top: Renda Extra and Investimentos, Plano de Acao. The plan began small. Mark didn't chase crypto or day trading or other flashy promises. He looked for reliable, low-barrier, skill-based ways to add income. He found 3 paths: freelance services, reselling, and dividend-based investments. Step 1: leverage what he already knew. Mark had worked in logistics for over a decade. He understood supply chains, customer service, and Excel like few others. He joined platforms like Upwork and Fiverr, offering spreadsheet automation services. His first client paid $40 for a simple inventory tracker. It was modest, but it planted a seed. People were willing to pay for what he once gave away at work. Within 3 months, he was earning an average of $600 to $800 per month in freelance gigs, working evenings and weekends. He never called it a side hustle. For Mark, it was his wealth engine. Step 2: flipping with purpose. Inspired by minimalist bloggers, Mark and Jennifer decluttered their house, and made over $1,200 selling used items on Facebook Marketplace, eBay, and OfferUp. They reinvested the profits into small inventory. Refurbished electronics and limited edition sneakers, guided by trending product data from sites like StockX and Camel. It wasn't passive. It took work. But within 6 months, their garage had transformed from storage into a profit hub. But the real shift came with investing. Mark used his now-repaired credit score to open a Roth IRA, starting with just $100. He devoured content from The Motley Fool, Vanguard, and reputable financial YouTubers. He avoided hype and embraced index funds, specifically, VTI, Total Stock Market ETF, and VXUS, Total International Stock ETF, 2 staples recommended by Boglehead investors. He followed the "pay yourself first" rule: 15% of all income, freelance, sales, main job, went straight into investments. He automated everything to avoid emotional decision-making. In his first year, he invested $3,800. The market didn't make him rich. It barely moved. But for Mark, the transformation wasn't external. It was internal. For the first time in his life, money was working for him. And then came real estate. Through BiggerPockets and local meetups, Mark discovered REITs, real estate investment trusts, that allowed him to invest in property without buying physical buildings. He chose VNQ, a diversified REIT ETF. The dividends were small, a few dollars here and there, but the psychological impact was massive. "Someone paid me rent this month," he told Jennifer one night, holding up his phone. "I didn't do anything. And it's legal." That year, Mark and Jennifer crossed the $10,000 mark in total savings and investments. They framed a fake check with the number and hung it in the living room. Not because they were rich, but because they were finally owners, not just workers. Their journey wasn't flashy. They didn't go viral. They didn't sell courses. But what they built was replicable: a stable, diversified, value-based financial life rooted in simplicity and resilience. Statistically, only 18% of Americans have more than $10,000 in non-retirement savings, according to Bankrate. Mark and Jennifer had joined that minority not through luck, but through intentional, incremental choices. Mark began mentoring 2 young men from his old warehouse job. One asked, "What should I invest in first?" Mark answered without hesitation, "Your own skills." That's the only asset that guarantees returns in any market. By embracing income diversity and long-term thinking, Mark and Jennifer didn't just fix their finances. They built something that couldn't be taken away: knowledge, confidence, and options. The braces? Fully paid, in cash. But more importantly, Lily got something more valuable: two parents who now understood money, and could pass down a legacy far more powerful than wealth. 2 years after the collapse, Mark stood barefoot on the porch of his modest home, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The morning sun lit his face as Lily ran through the sprinkler in the yard. There were no luxury cars in the driveway, no exotic vacations planned, and yet, he felt rich in a way he never had before. Not because of money, but because of control. The old Mark had chased status. The new Mark built systems. That mindset shift was the difference between temporary survival and long-term sustainability. And the first system he built was automation. Every dollar Mark and Jennifer earned had a purpose. Their checking account was now just a funnel. Bills were paid automatically, investments were deducted before they ever saw the money, and weekly transfers to savings ensured emergencies would never again destroy their life. They lived by the 3-account rule: essentials, 70%. Freedom, 20%. Dreams, 10%. That 10% dream fund? It was now going toward a down payment, not for a mansion, but a duplex in a stable neighborhood, where they could live in one unit and rent the other. It was a slow goal, but it was theirs. Financial sustainability wasn't about being perfect, it was about removing friction. They had stopped depending on willpower. Their money moved with discipline, even when emotions fluctuated. The second pillar was resilience. Mark remembered how vulnerable they had been: one job loss, one unexpected bill, and their world fell apart. Now, they kept 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account, untouched. Jennifer even took on a remote part-time job teaching Spanish to kids via video calls. It wasn't much, but it diversified their income, something most Americans never consider until it's too late. According to a 2023 report by Lending Club, 60% of U.S. adults still live paycheck to paycheck, including nearly 40% of those earning over $100,000 a year. That was Mark's old life. He had joined the minority who now had breathing room, and it changed everything. But what truly cemented their new foundation was legacy planning. One rainy afternoon, Mark and Jennifer met with a financial advisor, a real one this time, not a fast-talking salesman. They discussed life insurance, a basic will, and a financial binder outlining all their accounts and instructions. Not because they were paranoid, but because they were finally thinking long-term. Generational wealth, the advisor said, starts with documentation. And so, they documented everything. Lily had a custodial Roth IRA, funded by small gigs helping in Mark's reselling business. At age 12, she already knew what compound interest meant, and how to make money without begging for it. But more than the money, Lily witnessed conversations, open, calm, strategic talks about finances that had once been taboo in their home. She saw mistakes, recovery, and now, momentum. The third and final pillar of their sustainability was community. Mark began hosting monthly finance and fire pit nights in his backyard. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors gathered to eat, talk, and share stories of financial wins and failures. There were no gurus, no selling, just real people trying to learn. That sense of shared accountability made their journey feel less lonely. It created a support network, something they never had when they hit rock bottom. Jennifer once told a neighbor, "We used to think shame was part of money. Now we know clarity is." Their life wasn't luxurious, but it was designed, not reactive, not accidental. That made all the difference. One Sunday evening, as Mark tucked Lily into bed, she whispered, "Dad, I want to be like you when I grow up." But without the scary part at the beginning. He smiled. "That's the goal, kiddo. And in that moment, Mark realized something powerful. He hadn't just fixed his finances, he had ended a cycle. No more pretending. No more drowning in silence. Just a quiet, strong, sustainable life built one decision at a time. His story wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't fast. But it was real. And for thousands of people just like him, that's exactly what they need to believe in again.